Song Deshe Tsawa Song Sarong Tigle Rangshin Janje Seng O Rangshin Teje Chokorla Janje Nimbo Barde Jose Ji Ho Nazo Nangwa Jede Zenri Ji Korwa Lugu Jede Jambe Jo Rangre Ozer Yingsu Ngaso Jir Tseme Shi Ngane Semje Do Lama Dang Kanjo Rinpoche Namba Samje Daso Sanjen Tam Jeje Lo Jusu Jor Jinje Labdu Sur Chalam De Jor Jinje Labdu Sur Lam Chupa Sawar Jinje Labdu Sur Chupa Yeshe Su Charwar Jinje Labdu Sur Nama Arya Lai Kedan Ledan Nujin Ke Drubam Dadami Kenandang Druwa Kanji Drage Jizambara Tam Jeke De Dage Cheten Samjen Namje Zambadang Lai Chera Jitawar Chechon Tamante Bayi Chichi Gorla Kordo Sor Chasarwadan Chichin Shabadan Jesu Yiram Krushin Sawai Gewa Chunse Dagi Jizaba Tam Jezove Janju Jembo 2:30 on the dot. How's everyone today? Paka? I feel like the last 2 days I've been going with the accelerator pressed against the floor and the turbo also on. So maybe today we should use a different gear, go at a different pace, try it a different way. So what I'd like to do, if you're agreeable, is to start by reading a chapter on bodhicitta from my book. And we'll see how that goes. And then after that, again, we'll see maybe more discussion, or maybe we can walk through Tonglen meditation together. We can decide then. So part 2 of this book is a series of reflections on different topics, not identified by name usually. Like escape from the I-land, I/land is about emptiness, pride and humility, and this chapter is called The Crucible of Compassion. It's the longest chapter in the book, so get comfortable. At this point, you may feel that a crucial transition has been glossed over. On the one hand, I have painted a very bleak picture of our prospects as sentient beings. I have drawn this dire portrait, however, only in order to present the truth of emptiness. Emptiness means that people, no matter how much they struggle, do not and cannot exist in the manner in which they hope or imagine. How disappointing. Nor do things exist in the way we apprehend them. How incredibly frustrating. On the other hand, I have continually characterized realized practitioners as joyous, light, and full of life. These are people who, on an experiential level, in no way are deceived by how things might appear, but instead are attuned to the empty, interdependent nature of all they can know or experience. The great 11th century scholar and master Longchenpa had a perfect description for this state of being: total ease or total relaxation. But the obvious question, of course, is how does one get from one state to the other? How can a single truth first be traumatic and then liberating? This is where those who tend to think of Buddhism as a nihilistic philosophy, advocating quiescent cessation of all thought and feeling, most emphatically miss the point. What is missing in their accounts of this spiritual alchemy is the crucial role performed by the crucible of compassion, or what we call bodhicitta, a noble awakened heart. Buddhist practice is not the exchange of one set of flawed concepts for another set that seems more durable. Nor is it the deliberate renunciation of all ideals. It is not at all a cleverly disguised skepticism or stoicism that boils down to life sucks, get used to it. Rather, as the Dalai Lama often points out, Buddhism is a practice of life, a path to refine and develop ourselves as human beings. That refinement requires a genuine change of heart and not just erudition or discipline of mind. Some traditions emphasize the role of grace in changing our hearts and transcending our weaknesses. But while, in a sense, the grace or blessing of those who have traversed the path to awakening before us is vital, exclusive reliance upon it doesn't always work out, at least not in the long run. Simply praying for enlightened intervention might also solidify a concept of worthlessness, of lacking the resources within to accomplish the task, which can be debilitating and self-defeating. In Buddhist practice, our salvation, quote unquote, from misery hinges in large part on our willingness and commitment to emulate the life examples of great masters of love and compassion, like Shakyamuni Buddha. Our awakening does not derive solely from their unilateral power to save us from ourselves. As it is said, the iron hook of the ever-present majesty of realized beings must connect with the iron ring of our own diligence and inspiration. Once again, an interdependent conjoining of auspicious factors is vital. As every one of us knows, change, real change, is incredibly difficult and full of painful trials. Anyone who tries to convince us otherwise is a liar, and we should be very wary of that person's agenda. By the same token, anyone who tells us that people never change is either ignorant, disillusioned, or both. It is precisely because we don't actually exist as solid entities or exist unto ourselves that change is not only possible but inevitable. What we might simply lack at this point is the knack to direct that change positively, the intelligent faith to take inspiration from the fact that others truly have gone this way before, or else the obdurate will to persevere. So what does it mean then to awaken as a better and therefore happier person? When we were young, we probably were told by parents, teachers, or other role models that we ought to be good and kind. But rarely did anyone explain precisely how to do that, and so we were easily tempted to fake it. But no one really wants a jolly good fellow that nobody can deny with a venal heart for a best friend. Another common idiom in our culture is to identify some people as good and others as not quite so good, as if goodness is simply an intrinsic quality dispensed in unequal and possibly random measures by an indifferent God or biology. Many spiritual faiths and ethical traditions explain, for that matter, the value of improving our temperament and our treatment of others. While this is excellent as far as it goes,
Having a rationale for personal development is not quite sufficient as a technique, as method. So we may agree that it is a good idea to be kinder and more compassionate, but we can still be left feeling unsure how to do it and disappointed with the results of our efforts. What Buddhism in all its refinements presents is a set of practical methods we can actually use in our lives in order constructively to change how we relate to ourselves, to others, and to the world of sensory and conceptual information constantly inundating us. The golden key to this methodology is deliberate and heartfelt cultivation of a quality of universal loving-kindness and compassion, bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, quite simply, is a heroic heart that never closes or withdraws in the face of suffering, whether our own suffering or others' suffering. It is a firm resolve to relieve suffering by no longer perpetuating its causes, to instill joy by generating and supporting its causes, and to discard false discriminations that limit or retard the scope of our vision and restrict the capacities of our hearts. Bodhicitta is a crucible because it can accommodate and refine into useful alloys all of the base forces and challenges confronting us. Suffering is the raw material, the sewage that pours into the vessel of our lives unbidden. Since it can never be avoided in a thoroughgoing and lasting way, suffering is the most reliable resource at our disposal. When we use the trial and test of suffering to re-examine and loosen our pernicious habits, to surrender on the battlefield of old and unhealed wounds, and to acknowledge and be moved by the solidarity of all beings who have fallen and still fall on that cold, hostile field, we begin to train in bodhicitta. There is an interesting dynamic operating here. Because our self-cherishing is so intense, so senseless, and so unsatisfying, we have to engage in techniques deliberately to loosen its hold on our attention and our hearts. We train by conjuring images of the helpless suffering of others, comparing its magnitude to our own trifling complaints, and so try to loosen up and let our hearts melt with sympathy. That is a contrived but effective method, and one of many at that. Through it, though, we remember that we are most alive, most inspired, and most engaged when we forget ourselves. We find ways literally to trick ourselves into doing that. But even as we strive to cherish others above ourselves in such contrived ways, something amazing happens. We begin to relax with less effort and observe the beauty of experience unfold moment to moment. We experience our world with greater comfort but much less attachment. We begin to get the truth of emptiness on a gut level. We slowly figure out, through directing our concern to others, that the self we so zealously protect is fundamentally unprotectable and even unfindable. And so, as we become able to relax our obsessive fixation on the welfare of this self, there is a spontaneous upwelling of compassion, of full-heartedness, without our resorting to any such contrivances. Such spontaneous upwelling of concern for others, in other words, is a natural outgrowth of and complement to our growing recognition of the empty nature of the person. As we relax behind the image and dream of ourself, the tightness around our rib cages relaxes, and our hearts simply have more room to do their job. Our suffering is a big deal and binds us into a tight knot only when we are heavily invested in the belief that suffering is to be avoided and the self protected against it at all costs. When our perspective shifts to that of a compassionate hero, however, we regard suffering as a primer on where our false and ungrounded sense of permanence and solidity is blinding us to reality, to the truth of emptiness. In that sense, suffering can be a potent reminder and catalyst to the development of bodhicitta. Are you with me? This can occur on a fairly obvious level. If only I weren't so defensive when my partner complains about my bad habits, maybe we would get along better and I would actually be willing to change my ways. Or we may use an experience of suffering and loss in a far deeper way, simply looking without blinking directly at the experience itself, until we expose the fact that it has no core or essence. There is a feeling and a thought, but unless we hold on to them, they are momentary and insubstantial. We simply become unable to remain that worked up. We all get stuck and tend to cling too long and too tightly in quite personal and idiosyncratic ways. Therefore, none of us possesses the secret shortcut to leaving the realm of suffering behind for good. Even if we did, that shortcut wouldn't necessarily work for everyone else. It is not as if you could get lucky and have someone identify you at birth as the next incarnation of the Dalai Lama. Selection of the Dalai Lama is not a lottery where the winner gets to grow up joyful, wise, and compassionate. You actually have to have made the journey of the Dalai Lama with all of its twists and turns, peaks and valleys, in order to be the Dalai Lama. If you actually knew how hard it has been and is to walk in his shoes, you would realize just how far you have yet to journey to be able to last for an hour or a moment as him. I know I have. The Dalai Lama makes it seem entirely effortless to radiate genuine concern for the welfare of others at all times. That is a measure of his mind-boggling accomplishment. It is the result of hard work and total dedication for years and lifetimes. It is utterly miraculous that such a person could walk among us, but not at all mysterious how he got here. I struggle every single day to let go of my gripes and grudges and open a little space within and around me to accommodate others. I've been crushed several times in my life by suffering of an order and magnitude beyond my capacity to cope. I've pledged my heart to others and then watched helplessly as they chewed it up with the insensitive glee of goblins. I have wallowed. Listen. I have wallowed in bottomless pits of depression and despair for so long that someone surely has erected bronze plaques beside those pits in my honor. But I have managed to hang on. I am still here. Just because I'm starting to understand the work that I have to do and how to do it, at least enough to explain it coherently to others, does not mean that I've completed it. Far from it, I have barely started. But having started, there is no stopping. No matter that I often discover, to my chagrin and embarrassment, that my progress is illusory or excruciatingly slow, I will never again fundamentally believe that my welfare and happiness can come at the expense of others. Nor will I ever again really believe that I will find contentment through changing other people or causing them, by hook, crook, or billy club, to meet my needs. This conviction is the starting point, at least, for genuine bodhicitta. It makes the path, the real path, possible and workable. I've observed that, no matter in which milieu I find myself, people tend to describe themselves and likely believe that they are basically good. But at the same time, people freely and convincingly articulate the reasons why other people with whom they come into contact are bad, or at least not so good. This seems almost a universal trope of human discourse. We are the good guys, they are the bad guys. And because when we talk to one another in this way, we are friendly and companionable, full of support, and forming alliances towards some common goal or purpose, it becomes easy to believe that this is true. Stepping back, one can see that this is really quite funny. Most people who are not lawyers, for example, find it easy to express derision toward lawyers, ridiculing them as morally bankrupt, greedy, arrogant, and callous. If you enter the legal profession, though, as I did, you will find that virtually every lawyer you meet believes that he or she is exempt from the general rule that lawyers are bad people. When, as a law student, you first interview with prospective employers, each recruiter tries to emphasize the qualities that makes his or her firm a friendlier, more human and decent environment in which to work. Later, when you begin to practice law, almost invariably your team members and colleagues will bond by sharing war stories about how they prevailed through virtue, cleverness, and daring do in the face of the evil machinations of their opponents. Our cases always have merit. Theirs always rely on trickery and obfuscation. To many lawyers, unfortunately, every compromise of principles can be justified. Thus, highly prominent and successful lawyers who cleverly steal from their clients, verbally abuse their staffs, cheat on their spouses, become drug-dependent or thrill-dependent, and live only for their own imagined glory, seem to believe that, on the whole, they are making valuable contributions to society, such that all of their degenerate behavior is forgivable or irrelevant. I kid you not, lawyers never admit that they are wrong unless it is genuinely expedient. And even then, they don't really believe it. Of course, I am not talking about us good lawyers. Lawyers may well exemplify it at times, but the tendency of human beings to believe that they are in the right seems virtually universal. That belief is an enormous obstacle, no matter whether in a particular instance one happens to be right or not. So long as one is entrenched in the view that one is in competition with others to succeed and be happy, the reality of interdependence and therefore the crucial importance of bodhicitta will be almost impossible to recognize and appreciate. At the same time, we simply have to grow out of the childish belief that our ability to enlist others onto the roster of those who believe that we are right and good is sufficient proof that we are good and righteous. Taking that one step further, we must become certain that the words and actions of others have no power to determine the quality of our own experience. If my heart grows and my horizon expands by surrendering and breaking through fixation upon myself, then nothing others say or do can contract my heart or horizon. Only I can do that. It is my fixation, confusion, and obsession that qualifies my experience, not theirs. Therefore, it really and truly does not matter if my best intentions are misunderstood, unappreciated, distorted, resented, or lied about, except insofar as I learn thereby how to implement them more skillfully. Ingratitude and spite are irrelevant because they cannot hurt me unless I am so foolish as to forget that reinforcing my sense of being a wonderful person is an obstacle, not an objective. For example, my kind Dharma teachers wish me well and wish me to use wisely and kindly the tools that they have bestowed upon me. They might address me as Lama Sherab or as Tukula to remind me of their heartfelt aspirations that I live up to such titles. But if I get an ego boost out of the praise they heap upon me and swagger around feeling self-satisfied, however, I will have betrayed them. Conversely, and not infrequently, I am challenged in ways both subtle and not to justify having these titles. But someone else's reservations and doubts about my qualifications are valuable, insofar as they heighten my alertness in the same way as do my teacher's praises. But since criticism and calumny best reveal the state of mind of the person who speaks them and not of their target, that is their only value. No doubt there were some who thought my decision to become a lawyer the easy way out, an unconscionable departure from the commitment to practice Buddhism devoutly. That's something that lawyers say, unconscionable. Nothing could be further from the truth. Had I stayed in seclusion purporting to work on myself, I would have been avoiding most of the struggles of life with which others have to deal, to say nothing of spurning the personal advice of the Dalai Lama. That's discussed earlier in the book. Not that retreat is particularly comfortable or easy. It can be, and often is, anything but easy or comfortable. But it is controlled and relatively protected. The hardest part of retreat by far, once one gets the hang of it, is stepping back out the door, not knowing whether a precipice lurks on the other side. It can, in fact, be terrifying. There is no safety net waiting. I certainly had none. I only had the determination to find my way in the world without veering from my commitment to deepen my training and to benefit others if I could. For me, being a lawyer represented a supreme challenge, since my personality flaws leaned towards arrogant intellectual superiority anyway. In the first year of the 3-year retreat, before the practice had cut me down to size and then kept whittling me down further, my nickname among my fellow retreatants, through the sign language of 5 fingers placed against the forehead and pointed upward, representing a crown, was the spoiled prince. So choosing a profession characterized by intellectual competitiveness was nothing less than the perfect test of my training. It would be like feeding my pet demon when caution dictated starving it. Sometimes I'm not sure whether I passed the test of a decade practicing law. There were many occasions when I felt frustrated and demoralized by the challenge of proving to others that I understood a legal point better than they did. I knew that I did, but their pride and insecurity forbade them from seeing it, or caused them to resent me for it, or so I felt. Sometimes I ran out of patience with other people's egos, or that's how it seemed to me. Because I had to drive myself so hard to make it through lean years, I was at times too hard on others, or at least that's how I justified it. Sometimes I wondered whether it could ever really be possible to thrive in a work environment where, almost inevitably, the fact that I was a Buddhist Lama was a secret, or not so secret, stigma that I bore. Despite exhausting myself working up to 3,000 hours per year, I spent every bit of downtime offering my services to Dharma students, often crisscrossing the country on red-eye flights to and from my desk on consecutive Friday and Sunday nights. Still, to one of the named partners of our law firm, I was going off to a commune. The blessing cords around my neck reminded another named partner in our firm of a cowrie shell voodoo necklace he had once seen. A blasphemous accoutrement that was sure to alienate clients and judges, as he told me at a firm picnic one summer. He urged me to clean up my act, since in all other ways I was an outstanding lawyer. On those occasions when I had to look long and hard at where I was and what I was doing, however, I always arrived at the same realization. People are people. None are more or less worthy of our attention, concern, and compassion. No people, for that matter, are better or worse simply by virtue of belonging to this or that group. Every Buddhist born in America can tell you horror stories about other people in their Buddhist communities and practice groups. Most of them can tell you stories about being dragged as conscripted labor into projects of questionable utility. Maybe that doesn't happen so much anymore, but in my day it did. We must always persist, therefore, in driving home to ourselves that the environment, including the people in it, simply cannot be allowed to determine whether we are able to work effectively with our own minds and hearts. We must always persist, therefore, in driving home to ourselves that the environment, including the people in it, simply cannot be allowed to determine whether we are able to work effectively with our own minds and hearts. If it takes working 10 years as a lawyer to get this point, so be it. If it takes a decade of isolation and retreat to reach that same point, so be it too. The number one error made by novice Buddhist practitioners, in my view, is thinking that the people and circumstances presented in their daily lives stand in the way of practice rather than fueling and supporting it. Indeed, we can remain novices our entire lives if we do not overcome this error. The great 8th century Indian sage, Shantideva, expressed this point best in his masterpiece called Learning to Live as a Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva way of life, Bodhisattva-charya-avatara. He explained that, at heart, what we really want is to avoid feeling upset and angry. The way we usually try to do this, however, is to defeat all those who oppose us and eradicate all unpleasant environmental stimuli. This approach inevitably spawns greater conflict and anxiety. It is like trying to make our way through a broad valley of sharp rocks by covering the entire valley floor with soft leather. That's his example. We are always going to need more leather, and a lot of animals are going to lose their hides. When we recognize, however, that the ease with which we become upset or angry is perhaps our most potent enemy, we see the merit of practicing patience and fortitude, forgiveness, kindness. Applying patience in trying circumstances, Shantideva says, is like putting leather soles on the bottoms of our feet. With them, we can cross any treacherous valley with far less difficulty. When we stop blaming others and the world for our own suffering, that is not actual bodhicitta. It is simply a prelude, or as lawyers would say, a condition precedent. But the process of breaking through our ingrained habits of cherishing self over others, even to this limited extent, affects a remarkable reorientation. knowing deep in our hearts that everyone really is in the same boat, that everyone struggles with the cold, hard facts of life, aging, sickness, and death, just to name a few, is potent and sobering. When we at least place ourselves and others on the same level, seeing, as a Jewish sage once wrote, that kindness is vital because everyone is fighting a great battle to make it through their lives, we can actually start to practice bodhicitta at a ground floor level. Here is an entirely mundane example from my own life, and I hope my brother will forgive me for relating it. I've never asked him if he does or doesn't. When I first returned to visit my family after completing the 3-year retreat, I was hanging around in the kitchen after lunch one day with my brother and my uncle Ralph from Ottawa. How far is Gatineau from Ottawa? Yeah. One of us had the idea to lift the lid off the cake tray on the counter, and there it sat, one glorious last piece of my mother's homemade chocolate cake, my brother's favorite. His eyes swiveled with calculation. "How shall we share it?" he asked. I said, "You or I can eat a piece of cake anytime. In fact, you probably ate most of this one yourself." Why not just let Uncle Ralph have it as our guest? He'll appreciate it the most, don't you think? Now, to me, this was no big deal, just a tiny and sensible gesture of kindness. What I didn't realize was that to Ralph, who had been caught up in this dynamic many times in the past, who perhaps had never felt truly welcome in this kitchen in quite this way before, it was not minor at all. Before I knew it, this shy bachelor who had never before shown me his feelings, other than by a brisk rub on my head when I was a kid and we would go out on the street and play stickball together, had circled the counter and swept me into a trembling embrace, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. Simple kindness, even if it costs very little, can change the lives around us. And this is just basic ground floor bodhicitta. Allow me to harp further on the subject of taking ownership, for lack of a better term, of our states of mind. Or if you prefer, you may turn to the next chapter. What's the preference here? Keep going? Today, this is about 3-4 years ago now. Today, someone wrote me an email to tell me that I'm a real asshole. This is a person whom, at the request of one of my teachers, I have gone further out of my way to help than I have any other person in my life, before or since. Before this request was made, I had never even before met or spoken to this person. Afterwards, for months on end, I listened and read with full attention and concern as her life completely unraveled. Yet every suggestion I offered was dismissed with outright derision. At first, she elevated me to the position of potential savior. In the end, when I declined a specific request which I knew would prove both damaging to her and to many others, I became a demon. I was scorned and reviled for apparently not living up to a commitment to protect her as best I could. Of course, my true mission and purpose was to protect her precisely from these worst negative tendencies within herself, which were exacerbating her problems and accelerating her downward spiral. I tried to do this by reminding her of the brilliance and compassion of her teachers and to apply skillful means to what was unfolding within her own mind and experience. Unfortunately, what she wanted was for me to take her side by defeating her enemies and handing over the spoils of battle. This I could not and would not do. So being called an asshole by this person made me feel sad, but only because she was unable to see that neither I nor anyone else had created or perpetuated the problems she was facing. As a result, she was no closer to seeing how to free herself from the state of mind in which she was mired. Other than that, it did not hurt my feelings in the least. I feel that I cannot emphasize enough how much time and energy people seem to waste trying to make other people treat them better. Right? Mind-boggling. When we simply try to treat others well, to treat them as they wish to be treated, consistent with the directives to do no harm, to practice abundant virtue, and to thoroughly train our own minds, we're always learning. Life becomes very simple and rich and completely free of regrets. Over and over again, I see people get stuck on this hump unable to cross over. As Dharma students, we try to practice kindness and generosity. But if these acts are not appreciated, let alone reciprocated, our minds turn. There is anger, resentment, disappointment, and harsh judgment. It is hard enough to extend ourselves beyond our usual comfort zone. If we do and get a little bit stung, we immediately withdraw into the safety of our shells of self-justification, defense, and rationalization. We want our practice and our efforts to be acknowledged and rewarded right away. For some reason, it is just incredibly hard to see that no one else can stop us from reaping the rewards of training our own minds. The reason may well be that at bottom we're just more interested in how we are treated. We care more about being told that we are good than in simply being good. We just don't see that being good is far more satisfying. And that is because we've not yet glimpsed the truth of emptiness, and so subvert the teachings of Dharma as yet another way to tame our world and to feel better. When that doesn't work out, we blame the teachings or the teacher. It is worth really examining how caught up we can become in these worldly dharmas of praise and blame, compliments and insults. Why do we care so much? What difference can it possibly make whether our kindness is acknowledged, so long as others obtain the benefit we intend? How does it improve us to be recognized or reduce us to be ignored? These stories that we spin out in our minds about what others do or don't do and what it means or doesn't mean, how do they help us? What would we think if these same stories came out of other people's mouths and they were talking about us? The more we think about this, the clearer it becomes that our progress, our sanity, depends entirely on cultivating bodhicitta in a genuine way. Our absorption in and fascination with our own stories just does not help us in the end. The clever and seductive narrator of these stories in our minds will continue to spout off in our minds until we shut him or her up with kindness. Unless we allow ourselves to be melted and reforged in that crucible of compassion, we just don't stand a chance. The solid sense of self we constantly strive to reinforce with these thoughts of who we are and how we should be treated is an ever-receding horizon, a trick of light, shadow, and perspective. We will fall apart long before we ever find the comfort and stability we are straining for, no matter how convincing we sound to ourselves or to anyone else. Just look at the great barons of enterprise, deans of academia, nothing personal, and leaders of government in their prime, and then at the doddering, helpless, crippled, and forgotten bitter old fools they often become if they live long enough. No lasting happiness lies in that direction. It is just not going to happen. Western Dharma students often want to jump to the head of the class. It is how we were brought up. But when it comes to internalizing the reality of interdependence, of the interplay of appearance and emptiness, of awareness and emptiness, and most crucially of compassion and emptiness, there is simply no way to skip grades. These things must be learned for real. Until we really have gotten the point, we have to work harder and harder at cultivating bodhicitta. Bodhicitta will never steer us wrong. And when we master what is called ultimate bodhicitta, that which arises naturally and spontaneously as the expression of our realization of emptiness, our joy and contentment will be unshakable. Chirmidokpe Depa, irreversible faith. In the meantime, next time you recite a praise in honor of the Buddhas of the 3 times, past, present, and future, take a moment. Remind yourself that the Buddhas of the future are none other than those assholes you have to deal with today. Lama asked me not to keep overloading. Says, you've learned a lot of different meditation techniques, a lot of teaching, a lot of practice in this retreat. How many people have already received instruction in and practiced Tonglen? Most people. I'll take questions for now. comments. Someone asked me in a note that was passed yesterday, what were you saying about non-dual awareness? I don't remember saying anything about non-dual awareness, do you? I guess my only answer is there some other kind? What would that be like? Yes?
What's the name of the book?
The name of the book is A Path Strewn with Flowers and Bones, and the Dean of Dzogchen will make it available to everyone at the end of this retreat. Right? Or Amazon, or barnesandnoble.com, or blazingwisdom.org website, etc. Kindle, it's on Kindle. That would be here. Can we do that, since I'm leaving tomorrow? No. Why don't I sign some for you, and then you can... I'll sign them tonight.